Hey, everybody. Welcome back to another episode of Candid Conversations with your CPA. I'm your host, Raymond Guns with Dope CFO, and we have our guest today is Travis Copenhaver, partner at Visante Law Firm. Visante is a national law firm focused on cannabis and psychedelics, and he's based out of the Michigan office. Travis, you want to introduce yourself?
Sure. Hi. Thanks for having me, Raymond. My name is Travis Copenhaver. I am our managing partner at our Michigan office. I do a lot of work in the Great Lakes region, Illinois, Ohio, Minnesota, the Dakotas, things of that nature. My practice has historically been in the state of Michigan. That's where a lot of my expertise is coming from. But our team serves pretty much in every legal market in the United States, and excited to talk to you.
Nice. Thanks for jumping on. And yeah, your background in the Michigan market, obviously it's actually a fairly established market in the Midwest. It's definitely the oldest market in the Midwest. And you're a service provider to the cannabis industry, on the legal side. We're on the accounting and finance side. So I figured it'd be great value to our kind of guest viewers just to hear us rap back and forth. So why don't you tell us a little bit about your background and how you initially got involved in the cannabis industry?
Sure. Well, my practice has been in cannabis. It really kind of started in 2015. Before that, I had come from a couple different kind of like early career projects. I did a little bit of state of Michigan prosecution in like municipal courts. Moved from that into intellectual property and brand development here in Michigan. Then in about 2015, I was looking for a change in my career. And there's a lot of chatter about legalizing medical marijuana, kind of taking what we had a patient caregiver system from 2008 and putting it into a commercial licensing system. There's a lot of activity going on in Lansing. So I started paying attention to that, started working for a small boutique law firm. The legalization itself in Michigan didn't happen until 2016. But for that first year of my career, I spent almost all of my time working with patients and caregivers, dealing with the issues of the day for those types of behaviors back then, and then preparing a lot of those groups for legalization. Moving into 2016, very active in doing both, local municipal work and state level license acquisition and then operation for the medical licensing system. And then, obviously Michigan legalized adult use in 2018. So I was very active in both the push for that legalization movement, the onboarding of that system, and then the commercial kind of licensing work for adult use that kind of laid on top of our medical licensing foundation.
Appreciate that background and kind of like the phases of legal work that go into opening up a state. It is very interesting where there's the lobbying efforts and just the legal side on the front end just to make it legal. And then once that happens, it's not like we just flip a switch and the retail stores are open. Then there's the licensing process of like, well, who gets these business licenses that we've now just recently legalized? And then obviously once they're ongoing, there's continuous stuff to talk about or focus on. It's very interesting. I like that.
Yeah.
What you've been in the industry then for a few years now, so you've seen the constantly evolving landscape, and I think that's what makes cannabis fun. But currently, what are some events or trends that have caught your attention of the evolving landscape?
Sure. Well, especially here focused on in the kind of the Midwest region, we've had a lot of our legal markets kind of moving into more maturity lately. So we've kind of moved out of the entrepreneurial phase where there's a lot of like startup activity and excitement and folks getting in to these new markets, finding their market share, watching a lot of those businesses kind of both grow and kind of team up or consolidate with one another, or go through the motions, realize it wasn't for them, and kind of move on to other things. We've also seen a lot of kind of the shift in moving from kind of on-ramping a new type of business activity from a state regulation and local regulation standpoint, and moving into more of an operations and compliance mindset when it comes to dealing with regulators. So, you see these industries shift from creating an industry to then kind of operating that industry. And there's a different kind of set of skills that lead folks to success kind of from those two phases. So we've seen a lot of that transition in some of the markets around here, namely Michigan's the one I'm the most familiar with. But we're looking to some new markets in the region too. And we're kind of seeing folks who kind of had their heads down and figuring out how to operate these businesses as their markets kind of become more sophisticated, as the rules become more fleshed out, more details are known, as you kind of see best practices being developed for that system. And a lot of folks with those skill sets are now, looking to other markets again, as we have, in cannabis here in the United States, as these different kind of states come online. And it's fun because, there's a lot of good work and a lot of good opportunity for folks in these different phases of an industry like this. So it's nice to kind of see where people can find their niche. Some people are really good at optimizing kind of successful businesses and taking them to the next level, where other folks are really good at getting these businesses started in the first place, positioning themselves for an exit, or helping that business kind of take into the next stage of growth. So, as we get more markets and as we're seeing kind of these other, we're up to 22 states, the District of Columbia, 23 adult use markets now. We're seeing more on the horizon. We're seeing other states with medical programs growing sophisticated. We're seeing just popular kind of support for cannabis continuing to trend upward. So we're just seeing a lot of just kind of sophistication coming to what was originally pretty much a gray area of practice, no matter what your kind of industry stakeholder position was. And as my career has matured, as I've gone through, my career trajectory, the industry that I work in has as well. It's kind of funny. We've all kind of grown up together over the last, 8 to 10 years. So.
Mm-hmm. No, that is really interesting. And like, it's kind of like the maturity of the industry. It's very much happening all around us, where I live in Wisconsin, so we have no medical, no adult use. We're like one of the last holdout states that don't even have a medical program. But then you have states like Michigan, like you were saying, it's been legalized since 2016, adult use. I mean, they're coming up on 5+ years. Then you have states like Minnesota, like have just, they're the most recent states who passed adult use here a few months ago. So there's that flurry of activity, and it's been very interesting. From the legal side, the accounting and finance is very similar, where you have those startup activities that need to be done. And they're different activities for a startup pre-revenue company than there is a post-revenue ongoing year 3, 4, 5 entity. And and so it is very much like the creation of the industry is happening while also the maintaining of the industry. And I think that's a very awesome time to be involved in, or awesome industry to be involved in. You can't really get that so much with, say, construction or the healthcare industry. Like, yes, new companies are being created, but like every state has healthcare, every state has construction companies.
It's one of those, from an attorney's perspective, it's one of those legal industries, which is really fun. And it's really what drove me into the industry in the first place, where, if you do real estate work, if you do contract work, if you do criminal work, which was my original assumption coming out of law school,
Okay.
There's hundreds of years of precedent. There's examples. No one's really reinventing the wheel. The last 5 years of my career, I think every project I've had to tackle for clients was a case of first impression. No one knows how to do it. You have to kind of figure it out. And it takes a certain mindset to thrive in that ecosystem. There's it's the development phase, but the skill set that makes you a good developer isn't always the same skill set that makes you a good compliance operator, right? The creativity and excitement does kind of get hammered down as when we're dealing with highly regulated industries, or when enforcement priorities rise to the top, and you're kind of built everything up on hope streams and excitement. Having a plan is really important, but sometimes cannabis, it either moves like molasses or it moves like lightning. Sometimes you have to move so quickly, you don't have the luxury of time to really make long-term decisions when you're entering into competitions, when you're making investments into what are effective lotteries, when you're competing with political local politics and things. And it's great. It's a really fun industry to work in, but it is not an easy industry to work in.
Yeah, it's a mindset for sure, because like from the accounting and tax side, from the tax side for sure, it's like we go off case law. Like, okay, as CPAs, we just would look at prior IRS court cases, and then we can direct forward. It's like, hey, this is the law. This is how it's been interpreted by a court case. This is, it's been tested in court. But in cannabis, it's so new, and these licenses are so new. These business models are so new, where it's like you need to have a bit of a risk tolerance, so to speak, that like, okay, we're in new territory. It's innovative. We're innovating a new industry. Like prime example is like cannabis delivery to like home. It's like, it's not all rolled out yet. There's kinks to it, but like at some point in our lifetime, we're going to be able to order it and it'll be delivered to our home. Cause like just how some states have alcohol delivery, or some countries have alcohol delivery, I've been told. So it's being okay. We're like, okay, I can't find a historical court case because we don't have 20, 30, 40, 50 years of court cases and court law to point to. So yeah, it's very interesting to see this trend happening. And on that note, I guess this is a good segue, is What challenges or obstacles did you encounter when starting to serve the cannabis industry, coming from a traditional non-cannabis industry and then transitioning into cannabis full time?
Yeah, it's kind of funny. I was basically went effectively from being a prosecutor to a cannabis attorney before we had a legalization market in Michigan. I mean, we had a patient caregiver system, but I was a business attorney. I was helping businesses prepare for licensing, really for a full year before we really had a commercial license. In my market, we had, kind of a disparity, the same way between states and federal law. We had certain cities in Michigan that were allowing what was effectively business activity that would have been completely illegal in the city next door. So we had this interesting balance of like who's your master when you're doing risk assessment. And as an attorney, as I'm sure you guys CPAs can relate, I can't help break the law. And there's a lot of interesting. I had a really interesting mindset on that because I basically been doing DUI enforcement and working with cops for the last 3 years through law school into my first job there. And I had really my strongest problem was legitimacy, but that was so long ago at this point. That back when Michigan was legalized, we were the 16th.
Yeah, what year was that?
Yeah, that was 2016. We were the 16th state to legalize medical commercial licensing back then, and now we have more than half the states in the United States have medical licensing laws. But back in that time period, it feels like a lifetime ago, but it really wasn't that long ago. The foundation, a lot of these laws, places like in California and certainly Michigan and other states, we had, federal enforcement still occurring. We were having raids on facilities. So a lot of these state level advocacy driven legalization efforts were designed to protect operators. So, Michigan's patient caregiver system, for example, specifically didn't want commercial licensing. A commercial license was a known location that could be a target of a raid. So they created a system with hundreds and hundreds of smaller operators, basically doing, non-business activity. But because there's such a demand and because cannabis is so popular and continues to be supported, that was the foundation of what became our commercial industry. And there's a lot of growing pains because of that. We had a lot of folks who didn't get captured by the licensing opportunities. We had a lot of folks that wanted to be legitimate operators, but our regulation structure just wasn't going to allow them in, whether it was because of background check issues or because of financial issues. Raising capital, building out a network, is not always easy for you when you've had, what in Michigan was almost 6 to 10 years of criminal behavior. I used to, back when I was doing consultations for our state, I used to draw a bell curve, like here's the licensing system. If you're very, very sophisticated and have lots of assets and wealth, you're kind of down here. It's hard for you to go through the regulations and background checks because you just have so many disclosures you would needed to make to the state to pass their test. It just wasn't worth it. We would walk in dozens of bank boxes full of disclosures we'd have to make back then. And on the other side, you just didn't have the capital to pay attorneys and accountants and architects and local governments to lobby and building out teams with no guarantee that you're going to get one of these licenses. So regulatory systems that were kind of being built off of these older, when cannabis was still illegal structures, just kind of captured a certain type of person. And as we've seen new markets kind of come online, we've learned a lot of lessons from that. There's a reason a lot of these social equity programs weren't working back in the day. It's because it was difficult there was a very specific type of group of people who could walk through all the red tape it would take to get one of these licenses afforded along the way without access to traditional sources of financing and funding. New markets like Minnesota being the most recent state to legalize, learned a lot about all the reasons, regulations weren't working in some of these other states and has the luxury of, kind of designing systems to avoid some of those issues. But it's important to remember where those issues were coming from. Legalization was compromised. We have egregious testing requirements because the folks who didn't want cannabis to be illegal were using talking points that it was dangerous. The weed wasn't safe to consume because it wasn't being tested. So their talking point of make it safe, make it testing created a set of regulations that made testing very, very, very difficult to pass, which created a type of product that was difficult to cultivate without the wealth and finances necessary to ensure that your product had the quality controls to pass testing. I used to laugh at people like, take a tomato out of your grocery store and run it through a cannabis test, you're going to fail. That's not the world we live in anymore. As we have more legitimate operators out there in these markets, as more states come online with successful commercial industries. You can get new regulators from like a state like, just keep using Minnesota. The regulators in Minnesota can come and walk through the facilities in Michigan. They can go to California, they can go to Colorado and see what licensed legitimate businessing looks like. And they can then have an education that helps them write an informed bill. The House bill that came out of Minnesota is really well done. I think it's one of the best cannabis bills I've ever written. If you look back at the Michigan 2016 legalization commercial bill, you laugh at the absurdity of some of the things that were in there, but it made sense in their context, right?
For sure.
And as we've continued to have success, from a lot of the advocacy positions, we kind of snowball. We keep getting past the next barrier, but we've moved quickly. A lot of my mature market clients are having what I call growing pains or corporate divorce, right? They put these teams together, they put these projects together, and they've survived the turbulent kind of process of getting to market.
Getting to post revenue and getting some numbers up. Yeah.
But once you get to market, then you compete with your peers, and then once you see success, did you have a plan for what to do with that success? If you don't see success, did you have a plan for when you were going to call it quits or how you were going to shift? I mean, a lot of folks didn't have the luxury of even assuming they get that far. But that was other markets. A state like Minnesota has the opportunity both from regulators in designing how their system is going to work, but also entrepreneurs who want to approach it. Other states that are coming online as well can do the same thing. But the problem with cannabis is we have 23 markets that are basically unique, small little ecosystems. While they might be very similar to one another, what the challenges of the day in Illinois are not going to be the challenges of the day in Minnesota. They might have trends and similarities because they're all kind of evolved from one another. But look at hemp derived edible kind of situation in Minnesota. It's incredibly unique to their market, and it's going to have significant impact on how they're going to create regulations around both them and adult use cannabis products. But that's just a set of challenges and a set of solutions that just doesn't apply to any other adult use state, at least right now. So because of that, we're going to see a bunch of kind of behaviors and trends in their regulatory structure at different levels of government that are going to create challenges in Minnesota and skills and lessons that you can't just plop up and set down in Alabama or in South Dakota, right? You need to kind of understand your business, but cannabis folks, in my experience, are very good at that. They tend to ingrain themselves in their local situation and start small, and they almost build out from that. But it's how fertile is your soil is really kind of why I always focus on the laws we're dealing with. But I'm an attorney, that's what I do. There's also practices in starting a business, and sometimes a widget's a widget, and you might have unique kind of issues with how you have to run accounting in cannabis as opposed to selling sneakers. But there's still a lot of things you can look to, and the laws like that as well. When people say cannabis law, what does that really mean? It's just I do.
It's like cultivation law and retail law. It's like, well, they're just like industries, or like not industries, but like types of businesses.
It's really just a set of subject matter expertise that kind of applies to what you would try to do if it wasn't cannabis, right? When I do a purchase agreement with cannabis, it's not that much different than a non-cannabis purchase agreement, but there's a lot of very specific things you need to be aware of, or you're going to have issues. When you're writing a lease, when you're doing a JV agreement, when whatever you're trying to do, if cannabis is involved, there's basically just this set of filters you need to make sure that you stay copacetic with your ability to be competitive in an application situation, your ability to stay compliant in an operation situation. If there's enforcement going on and cannabis is involved, your risk is often higher, so you need to know how to mitigate those risks, right? A lot of these ideas apply to any industry you might be working in, but because cannabis is kind of a new emerging market with huge trajectory and timetables where things just roll out fast and there's these balloons and falls, it's just you need to kind of be aware of the trends of your market while also kind of being aware of like how cannabis in the United States is likely to be unfolding here in the next year.
And definitely that is like, I always tell people, it's like, it was crazy. 2016 seems like a lifetime ago, but so much has happened in cannabis in 5 years. Like we don't have 50 years to look back, but we have 5 now. So it's like, all right, that gives us like something to start with. And like I do think Minnesota is rolling it out very well because, like you said, they're able to look around at like what worked, what didn't work. They can actually look at it independently. Like, what was the genesis of some of the problems? To your point, it's like, let's not just look at the problem. Let's look at what started it, and then we can avoid that. And definitely seeing the mature markets, that is interesting as well. It's like, you got to start with the end in mind is kind of how we talk to our clients. And so whether it's you're going to run this forever, have an exit, or unfortunately, if it doesn't work out, it is still a small business in America. I don't know what the last statistic is, but it's like 9 out of 10 small businesses fail. So it's like cannabis, because it's not, a federally legal industry, they're predominantly small and medium-sized businesses in a startup industry, I would argue. So yeah, what is your plan if it doesn't, turn profit as quickly as possible? And it is 23 different economies. Like the prices, the prices per the inputs are going to be slightly different. The prices that you can sell your products at are going to be slightly different. The laws and the taxes, it's like the federal tax law, 280E, is fairly easy to understand, but then there's just layers of state tax, layers of local tax. And it's a slightly nuanced, but to your point, like taxes are going to be slightly different state to state, but it's still going to have, an excise tax, a sales tax, income tax. We're going to have these basic taxes. It's just, what is the nuance to that state, where that's what makes cannabis kind of unique, is like it's state to state. You kind of have to have your nuances. Whereas like construction in, Minnesota is going to be very similar to a construction company in Michigan. So very interesting. And I do like what they're doing with the hemp derived goods in Minnesota, because every time a new state comes online and they make progress in the, just the laws and how they do business, yeah, the next state, I like to think, makes a little bit more progress, ideally. So I think you guys did a pretty good job in Minnesota. Moving on to the kind of the next question, and this is a good segue, is based on your experience thus far, what significant changes do you anticipate in the cannabis industry over the next 3 to 5 years looking forward?
Yeah, from my perspective, we're really starting to see a shift in kind of cannabis from a legal perspective, whereas back in the old days, 3-4 years ago, a lot of these systems were like compromise laws where the advocacy elements were forcing them forward and they were getting support, but the roadblocks you were facing were traditional, regulatory structures, traditional legislation mindsets. Change is difficult, especially when you're the ones who have to do it first. And you were seeing a lot of these types of systems being put in place that were very reflective of compromise and very reflective of hesitation and reluctance. Whereas newer laws, like looking at Minnesota, you can definitely read through them and get the sense that they want these programs to succeed, and they're trying to really embrace the opportunity it creates for their market. So, looking at these hemp-derived products, it's unique to Minnesota. You can tell in the legalization bill that they're not only trying to ensure that there's a place for that, but that those types of operations that are proven to succeed already are successful. And you're seeing that in how they want to kind of capture social equity in this new law. Whereas like, unfortunately, in a lot of states I've worked with, social equity kind of comes in too late, right? In Illinois and
afterthought.
Yeah, like the market's already been dished out. Like it's hard to get market share to a social equity applicant when they don't have capital in the first place, and the market opportunity's already been dished out to the winners, and they're understanding why that type of thing didn't work, and creating a system where you're trying to make it work is just a mindset that we didn't have the luxury of focusing on when we were just trying to get the thing legal in the first place. Back when my state was legalizing cannabis, we were just trying to keep people out of jail. And from that perspective, completely successful. We basically don't have any criminal activity anymore for folks who are just consuming and possessing cannabis in Michigan, unless you're doing, commercial behavior that should be licensed. There's obviously things you can do to get in trouble, but enforcement priorities have changed, and those enforcement priorities shift to regulatory compliance for medium to larger size cannabis commercial businesses. And they're not being targeted at the little guy, the folks who are growing weed in their basement and sharing it with their friends, maybe making a profit, even though they shouldn't be, right? Like just the mindset has shifted. So
the priorities of enforcement, that's a good way to think through it. It's like Yeah, and you're seeing this in the States, yeah, where it's like when the states opened up and even like Colorado or California, like they were so punitive and restricting, they're like, we'll give it to you, but then every municipality could kind of fight it and do whatever they wanted. And so it is good where it's like now when a state comes online, it's like, we're not doing this just out of like reluctance, acceptance. It's like, no, we could probably tax this industry. It's an emerging industry. It's a little scary, but I think this is better for everybody. And yeah, we always tell people as well, where it's like because we deal a lot with like we prepare their audit trail in advance because it's like, hey, like business owner who grows cannabis and sells weed, it's like you're no longer really going to get in trouble for that. It's like you're going to get in trouble for not being licensed, not paying your taxes. So like what do we focus on? Make sure your compliance is dialed in from just your licensing, your banking compliance, your insurance, your state cannabis regulatory agency licensing, have your SOPs like at the facility so you actually can like be prepared for a site visit, pay your taxes on time and have supporting document. Like that's what you're going to get in trouble for. Like it's no longer so much like cultivating and, trafficking cannabis that the law is focused on. So that very interesting. That will continue.
Yeah, but and just like the attorneys and the CPAs of the world, regulators and police departments and the other aspects of this industry, construction, architecture, like insurance, like we all can look to see how things are working, how things weren't working, historically, but now the market is really more about how are we making this work? Why are we in this market, and how can we help businesses who are competing in this market succeed? The hardest part in a new emerging market is building a network and finding capital. The luxury things you can start worrying about is like, well, how do I scale up and how do I find the resources to get into my phase 2, phase 3 trajectories? But when you're not sure, like let's point at Minnesota again, we don't know how many licenses they're going to be, we don't know how competitive it's going to be. Unfortunately, if it's highly competitive, having more financial access than others is going to give you a competitive advantage, no matter how it shakes out and how they define it. So, trying to create a system that captures access for the largest amount of people, or the amount of people that you want that regulatory structure to capture, to have a successful system. Because you can look at states that have maybe been a little too open. It's great that everyone has an opportunity, but to your point before, 9 out of 10 likely to fail. You don't want to set up a bunch of folks to fail.
Yeah.
You want to create a system that captures not only the operators that want to be there, but the operators that are going to succeed. And you need to look to the metrics that are historically going to prove success, access to capital, experience, a pattern of behavior that looks like you can be a highly regulated actor.
Yes.
But excitement and creativity often don't, mesh with some of those behaviors. So it's when you're building a team, you kind of need both. There's a development phase, and the folks who take risks and get in there with unique ideas or interesting approaches to new markets, people who tackle cases of first impression, and if no one else is telling you how to do it, being the one to figure out how to do it is very usually lucrative for yourself. There's an opportunity in new markets that matures and changes when we shift to compliance and behavioral success. Once you have your business established, once you've made this investment and you've gotten some success, you need to protect it, you need to build it. And that's where when you see that shift in some of the markets I work in, that's when you start seeing like some of the folks who were instrumental to getting you there now become liabilities in some cases, right? They're not really the mindsets that help your business. So you need to know where in your industry you are, where you're going, and kind of what your long-term kind of approach to that's going to be. And some of that is unfortunately opportunity and luck. If you're in some of these competitive situations, you can put one of the best applications together and you still don't know if you're going to win until they make selections. And it's hard to build, access to financial wealth, when you don't know if you're going to get something in the first place. So it's still, these systems still have flaws, right? There's some of the best folks when I first started doing this that I really wish could have got a license, just weren't going to get one because they weren't in a position to have access to the assets they needed to truly compete. We see some solutions to that and some lessons and things that work, and you're seeing some new approaches to trying to create grants and things to help folks try. But those folks need to ask themselves, like, if you're going to enter into this market, you need to have a good plan. And whether you're a mature existing operator that's been around for years, and and you're trying to decide what trajectory you want to take your company, or you don't know what cannabis is and this is your first business you're starting, before you hire me or you should know what you want and why. And once you can kind of have those questions answered, you continue to create nuance there. Well, I thought this is what I wanted, and then I started doing it, and I realized maybe I wasn't completely right, but I can kind of amend that to this. And as you kind of hone in, wherever you are in this market, wherever you are as, either a service provider, or an operator or a regulator, you learn more as you go. I know so much about cannabis I would have never expected to know 5 years ago, but it's because I live and breathe it. I do cannabis all the time, and I deal with the folks who are out there doing it, the ones who have had amazing success and the ones who have had spectacular failure, and everyone in between. So,
Yes,
like
same.
any industry, there's winners and losers, and you want to help as many people succeed as possible, but someone's success is often at the expense of someone's failure, and vice versa, right? So, just understanding that, while there's a lot of excitement in these markets, and while there's a lot of ups and downs, there's always opportunity. You just need to know how you personally can take advantage of it, regardless of who you are.
Yeah, and it's always a balancing act too. I mean, we've seen it like just a fun example in the Midwest is Illinois very restricted in their licenses that they've been giving out. Michigan pretty much wide open. Like if you want to get some type of cultivator license or home, small license, a couple grand and a piece of real estate, like you're pretty much good to go. Whereas we always kind of explain to clients, it's like you need your cannabis business license and your real estate. Realistically, if you even want a chance of raising capital, like if you need it, or build a team that can self-fund it to get started. Because cannabis is a team sport. I mean, you can start it and launch it and do everything yourself because it is a startup industry, but like just having again, talk to the whole spectrum of success to epic failures. It's like on the median, the average is success is always a team. It's 3+ savvy individuals and they're pretty smart about the market. They've had prior business success because, to your point, the market is maturing over the next few years from just hardcore startup only to, hey, we're 3 years into this. Hey, we're 5 years into this. What is our 10-year tax strategy? It's like, this is how you really want to think. Because if you're just a flash in the pan, it's like, you're only there for 1 to 3 years. Like you don't really need to worry about audits and all this other stuff. But if you want to build a company with staying power, it's like, you need to plan for 5 years, 8 years, 10 years. And trust me, if you build something successul, you're going to get audited. You're going to have legal issues. You're going to need to like prepare for this stuff in advance. And because there's phases to business, you don't just start and fail or go to 10 million. It's like, you have to build it in phases. And I would argue these 10 million plus cannabis companies don't just happen on accident. Like they're being created from the beginning. This business owner already runs a $20 million tech company or a $20 million construction company. He's had success. So he's trying to recreate this in cannabis. And it's interesting too, the balancing act, like the free marketing person in me is like, just give everybody the license, let them sort it out. But then just the economist in me and CPA is like, and business owner myself, I'm like, well, let's put some thought into this. Cause like, even in Wisconsin, like to sell beer and liquor, there's licenses, there's a limited amount of them. Like I couldn't just open up a liquor store if I wanted to and start buying beer and liquor and sell it to the public. Like it's a licensing process. I got to go through the municipality of Milwaukee. So I'm like, I see both sides of it. And I think there's no right answer to that 100%. There's always going to be a balancing act between, the most good for the most people, essentially. And I would say that social equity and like getting access to capital and building the team, it is very much core to starting a business. And you're starting to see states start with that on the front end. Like, New York, for an example, they started I think they raised 150 million against the 200 million they're supposed to set aside. Awesome. All right, my man, last question of the day before we wrap this up. Speaking just to any other business owner, entrepreneurial like yourself, trying to get into the cannabis industry and make a positive impact, any advice or tips?
Yeah, here's the thing, like it's kind of counterintuitive. You want these systems to be difficult because if you get through them and you get into position, you're going to have to compete now that you're there. So it's not necessarily a bad thing that, it depends on your perspective, but it's not necessarily a bad thing that there's some difficulties to getting these programs and businesses set up. you don't want it to be so prohibitive that, it bars people that should have an opportunity and a fair opportunity. But you also, like to your point, don't want it to be so open that anyone and everyone can get it, because there's no value to the project in the first place. So when you want to get into this industry, like, you really should think about first why, and then challenge that assumption. We want to see people with great ideas that are going to create products and services for folks to actually help them, but also give them things they want, succeed. And we want to make sure that that's not all coming from one very particular type of group. We want to see a diversity of ideas and opportunities for all different types of folks. But in order to do that, you need to understand what the opportunity is and understand how you think you can take advantage of that opportunity for both yourself and your team. And if you build a great team, I don't think I've worked with any client group that's built on the back of one person. It's always been groups of people, regardless of you're a huge multi-state operator or a brand new startup. Regardless, if you have the sweat equity and they have the capital, or vice versa, you need to know what your team is. It's kind of like building a sports team, right? You gotta train, you gotta educate yourselves, and then you gotta perform when it's time to perform. And if you go into it with that mindset, and you do have an idea that you're testing and you believe in, and you're willing to work hard for, you'll see success. And folks like ours, you and me, want to see those types of clients. Those are my favorite clients, the ones who are really passionate but have a plan. The ones who understand what the opportunity is, understand the risks and challenges of it. I don't care who you are. If that's you, I'll help you. But it's not always easy, and it's not always going to be for you, right? You got to understand what you can do and what opportunities are there for you. But there are ways that you can get there if you're not there yet. So
I can appreciate that. Be passionate, but have a plan. I mean, we chose the cannabis industry for a reason. We're passionate about the plan, the culture, the industry as a whole, because it is exciting. It's the birth of an industry that we're like living our careers through, or starting our careers with. But yeah, same here. I could echo the same thing. Is like, I'm here to help anybody and everybody. So the more passionate you have and the better your plan is in advance, we can definitely get you to where you want to be. But it takes a team. So Thank you so much for your time, Travis. This was awesome, and appreciate you taking the time. Talk to you later.
Great talking to you.